You live your life according to rules you never chose, following moral codes that feel hollow and meaningless in your deepest moments of honesty. Every day you suppress your authentic desires and genuine thoughts because society has convinced you that conformity equals virtue, while your true self withers beneath layers of borrowed beliefs. I am Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who dared to question everything you've been taught about good and evil, right and wrong. What I discovered about moving beyond conventional morality will transform how you understand yourself and your potential, revealing the path to becoming who you truly are, rather than who others expect you to be. The same philosophical insights that shattered the foundations of traditional thinking can free you from the prison of inherited values and societal expectations. But first, like this video, subscribe for more revolutionary wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to embrace their authentic power. Let me take you back to where my journey began, to understand how I discovered the courage to question everything that seemed sacred and unshakable. I was born into a world of certainties. My father was a Lutheran pastor, and our household breathed with the rhythm of prayer, scripture, and unquestioned faith. The Bible was not just a book in our home. It was the foundation upon which all truth rested. I learned to read using its pages, and I believed with the innocent fervor of childhood that its words contained the absolute answers to life's deepest questions. My academic brilliance became apparent early. I devoured classical texts with an appetite that amazed my teachers, and by the time I reached university, I was already being hailed as a prodigy in philology, the study of ancient languages and literature. At 24, I became the youngest professor ever appointed to the University of Basel, a position that should have filled me with pride and satisfaction. I stood before that university podium, this artifact of academic authority, believing I was part of a noble tradition of scholarship that sought truth through careful study of humanity's greatest works. But something began to gnaw at me as I studied the ancient texts more deeply. The more I learned about how these supposedly sacred documents were actually created, translated, and transmitted across centuries, the more I realized that what we treated as eternal truth was really a collection of human interpretations, political decisions, and historical accidents. The Bible itself, I discovered, was assembled by councils of men with specific agendas, and its contents had been edited, revised, and modified countless times throughout history. This realization struck me like lightning on a clear day. If the foundation of all moral certainty was built on such shaky ground, what did that mean for everything I had been taught about right and wrong, good and evil? I began to see that the ancient Greeks, whose culture I studied so intensively, had completely different concepts of virtue and excellence than the Christian morality that dominated my world. Their heroes were not humble and self-sacrificing. They were proud, powerful, and self-asserting. The moment of my true awakening came during a lecture I was preparing on Greek tragedy. I was analyzing how the Greeks understood fate, suffering, and human greatness, when I suddenly realized that Christianity had completely inverted their values. Where the Greeks celebrated strength, beauty, and noble achievement, Christianity praised weakness, ugliness, and self-denial. Where the Greeks sought to become godlike through excellence, Christianity demanded that humans remain humble and broken. I felt the foundations of my world cracking beneath my feet. Everything I had been taught to revere, humility, self-sacrifice, turning the other cheeks, suddenly appeared to me as a systematic attempt to weaken and diminish human potential. I saw how these values served to keep people docile and controllable, how they prevented individuals from rising to their full height and claiming their natural power. The loneliness of this discovery was crushing. I could not share these insights with my colleagues, who were comfortable in their scholarly routines and conventional beliefs. I could not return to my family home and explain that everything we had built our lives upon was a elaborate fiction. I found myself isolated in a world of sleepwalkers, the only one awake in a society that preferred its comfortable dreams. This was my first encounter with what I would later call the herd mentality, the way most people live unexamined lives, following the moral prescriptions they inherited without ever questioning their origins or validity. I realized that the vast majority of humanity prefers the security of inherited beliefs to the terrifying freedom of thinking for themselves. Of all the things I have written, nothing has been more misunderstood than my declaration that God is dead. People hear these words and think I am celebrating, that I am some kind of gleeful atheist dancing on the grave of religion. Nothing could be further from the truth. When I announced the death of God, I was not celebrating. I was issuing a warning about the greatest crisis humanity had ever faced. Picture an empty cathedral, this artifact of what once was sacred, its vaulted ceilings echoing with silence where once there were voices raised in certainty. The stained glass windows still cast colored light across the stone floors, but the light illuminates nothing but emptiness. This is what I saw when I looked at the spiritual condition of modern humanity. When I said God is dead, I meant that. The idea of God as the foundation of absolute moral authority no longer held power over the human mind. For centuries, people could answer the question, how should I live, by pointing upward and saying, because God commands it. This gave their lives structure, meaning, and direction. Whether the commands were wise or foolish, whether they promoted human flourishing or diminished it, was irrelevant. They came from the highest authority imaginable, and that was enough. But the scientific revolution, the growth of historical consciousness, and the development of critical thinking had gradually eroded this foundation. People still went through the motions of religious observance, but the vital belief that sustained their ancestors was dying. They no longer truly believed that there was a cosmic authority dictating the terms of human existence. This should have been terrifying news, but most people had not yet grasped its implications. They continued to live as if the old moral system still had power, not realizing that they were living on borrowed time, existing on the momentum of dead beliefs. I saw them as sleepwalkers, approaching the edge of a cliff, and I was the madman trying to wake them up. In my parable of the madman, I described someone running into the marketplace with a lantern in broad daylight, crying, I seek God, I seek God. When the crowd mocks him, he smashes his lantern and declares that we have killed God. You and I, all of us together. We have become the murderers of all murderers. But then he realizes he has come too early, that this tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering through space. This is the key point that everyone misses. The death of God creates both the greatest crisis and the greatest opportunity in human history. Without the external authority of divine command, humans are suddenly thrown back upon themselves. They must create their own meaning, establish their own values, and take full responsibility for their choices. This is terrifying because it removes the comfortable certainty of following prescribed rules. But it is also liberating because it opens up infinite possibilities for human self-creation. Most people, when faced with this freedom, will try to find new authorities to follow: political leaders, scientific experts, popular opinion, or secular ideologies. They will create new gods to replace the old one because they cannot bear the weight of complete responsibility for their own lives. But for those with the courage to embrace this freedom fully, the death of God becomes the birth of authentic human greatness. This is why I mourned even as I announced this death. I understood that humanity was not prepared for the responsibility that comes with ultimate freedom. Most would either despair in meaninglessness or create new forms of slavery to replace the old ones. Only a few would rise to the occasion and become creators of new values, architects of their own meaning, artists of their own existence. The moment you begin to question moral certainties, you discover something shocking. The categories of good and evil that seem so natural and obvious are actually crude simplifications that prevent you from understanding the true complexity of human nature and human potential. These binary categories are like broken scales of justice, this artifact of false moral measurement that can only weigh things in two directions when reality contains infinite gradations and possibilities. Think about this carefully. When you label something as absolutely good or absolutely evil, you stop thinking about it. You place it in a mental box and never examine it again. But life is far more complex and interesting than these simple categories allow. What we call good often contains elements of weakness, conformity, and life denial. What we call evil sometimes contains elements of strength, creativity, and life-affirmation. I discovered this truth through years of studying human psychology and history. I noticed that there were really two completely different types of moral thinking that humanity had developed, and they had gotten confused and mixed together in ways that created tremendous psychological confusion. The first type I called master morality. This is the value system of strong, creative, self-directed individuals who judge things as either good, meaning noble, excellent, powerful, beautiful, or bad, meaning common, weak, ugly. In master morality, good means everything that enhances life, promotes growth, demonstrates strength and creativity. A master morality person asks, does this make me stronger? Does this help me become who I am capable of becoming? Does this create something beautiful and excellent in the world? The second type, one called slave morality. This is the value system of weak, reactive, resentful individuals who judge things as either good, meaning harmless, selfless, suffering, humble, or evil, meaning powerful, selfish, successful, proud. In slave morality, good means everything that minimizes harm, promotes equality, and keeps everyone safe and comfortable. A slave morality person asks, is this fair to everyone? Does this avoid causing offense? Does this ensure that no one gets hurt or left behind? Here is what most people do not understand. These are not just different moral opinions, they represent fundamentally different approaches to existence itself. Master morality is the morality of creators, innovators, leaders, and artists. It is the morality of people who want to grow, to achieve, to become something greater than they currently are. Slave morality is the morality of followers, conformists, and those who prioritize safety and equality above excellence and growth. Christianity, I realized, had institutionalized slave morality and made it dominant in Western civilization. It taught people to see strength as dangerous, pride as sinful, and self-assertion as evil. It made virtues out of weakness, suffering, and self-denial. This had the effect of systematically weakening humanity, making people ashamed of their natural desires for power, achievement, and self-expression. But here is the tragedy. Even potentially strong individuals had been infected with slave morality thinking. They judged themselves by slave morality standards, feeling guilty about their desires for success, ashamed of their competitive instincts, and conflicted about their natural urge to stand out and excel. This internal conflict was making them sick, turning their strength against itself. When I say we must go beyond good and evil, I do not mean we should become amoral monsters who ignore the consequences of our actions. I mean we must move beyond these simplistic, life-denying categories and develop more sophisticated ways of evaluating human behavior. Instead of asking, is this good or evil, we should ask, does this promote human flourishing? Does this help individuals become who they are capable of becoming? Does this create more life, more power, more beauty in the world? The person who moves beyond good and evil becomes a creator of values rather than a follower of inherited moral rules. They take responsibility for deciding what is worthy of pursuit and what deserves to be eliminated from their life. This requires tremendous courage because it means standing alone with your own judgment instead of hiding behind the moral consensus of the crowd. When I look into the mirror of human types, this artifact that reflects the dual nature of moral consciousness, I see the same person capable of living in two completely different ways. Every individual contains the potential for both master and slave morality, but most people have been trained to suppress their master instincts and embrace their slave tendencies. Understanding these two fundamental approaches to life is essential if you want to reclaim your authentic power. Let me explain master morality first, because it is the more natural and original form of human value creation. Master morality is the value system of individuals who are strong enough to create their own standards of excellence. These people do not wait for others to tell them what is valuable. They decide for themselves based on what promotes life, growth, and human flourishing. A person operating from master morality judges things as either good or bad, not good or evil. Good means noble, excellent, powerful, beautiful, life-enhancing. Bad means common, mediocre, weak, ugly, life-diminishing. Notice that this judgment comes from their own experience of what promotes strength and what promotes weakness. They are not following rules handed down by others. They are creating values based on their direct encounter with life. Master morality individuals are they say yes to their own desires, ambitions, and natural instincts. They do not apologize for wanting to excel, to stand out, to achieve great things. They understand that inequality is natural and necessary. Some people will always be stronger, more talented, more creative than others. And this is not a problem to be solved, but a reality to be celebrated. Most importantly, master morality is active and creative. These individuals focus their energy on becoming who they want to become, rather than on criticizing or resenting others. They are too busy creating their own lives to spend much time worrying about what everyone else is doing. Slave morality, by contrast, is the value system of individuals who are too weak to create their own values. So they define themselves in opposition to the strong. Slave morality judges things as either good or evil. Notice the emotional intensity of that word evil. Good means harmless, selfless, suffering, humble, equal. Evil means powerful, selfish, successful, proud, superior. Slave morality is fundamentally reactive and resentful. Instead of asking, what do I want to become? It asks, how can I bring down those who are above me? Instead of working to improve themselves, slave morality individuals spend their energy criticizing, undermining, and guilt-tripping those who dare to excel. Christianity, I observed, had taken slave morality and made it into a complete worldview. It taught people that the poor were blessed, that the meek would inherit the earth, that suffering was noble, and that pride was the deadliest sin. It systematically inverted every natural value, making weaknesses into virtues and strengths into vices. This had a devastating effect on human psychology. Even naturally strong individuals began to feel guilty about their strengths, ashamed of their ambitions, and conflicted about their desire to excel. They internalized slave morality values and began to judge themselves by slave morality standards. This created a toxic internal conflict that I saw destroying the mental health of countless individuals. Here is what you must understand. Slave morality appeals to the majority because most people are mediocre, and mediocre people naturally resent excellence. Slave morality gives them moral permission to feel superior to their superiors. It tells them that their weakness is actually virtue, that their lack of achievement is actually humility, and that their resentment of success is actually righteousness. But Slave morality corrupts even those who embrace it. It makes people sick by turning their natural instincts against themselves. It creates what I called bad conscience, the phenomenon of people becoming their own worst enemies, constantly criticizing and undermining their own efforts to grow and achieve. The path back to master morality requires you to recognize these patterns in your own thinking. Notice when you feel guilty about wanting success, ashamed of your competitive instincts, or conflicted about standing out from the crowd. These are slave morality reactions that have been programmed into you by a culture that fears excellence and wants everyone to remain safely mediocre. To reclaim master morality, you must give yourself permission to want great things, to pursue excellence without apology, and to judge your life by your own standards rather than by the opinions of the resentful masses. This does not make you selfish or cruel, it makes you authentic and alive. Deep within every living thing, I discovered the most fundamental force in existence, drive so basic and essential that all other motivations spring from it. I called this the will to power, and it is like a growing tree that pushes through concrete, this artifact of life force breaking through artificial constraints. Understanding this drive and learning to channel it properly is the key to psychological health and authentic achievement. Most people completely misunderstand what I mean by will to power. They think I am talking about the desire to dominate others, to accumulate political authority, or to control external circumstances. This is a crude and dangerous misinterpretation that has led to terrible historical consequences. The will to power is not about power over others, it is about power over yourself. The will to power is the drive to grow, to expand, to become more than you currently are. It is the force that pushes you to develop your talents, to overcome obstacles, to create something meaningful with your life. Every time you choose to learn something difficult, to push through resistance, to persist when others give up, you are expressing your will to power. This drive manifests differently in different individuals. In artists, it appears as the compulsion to create beautiful and meaningful works. In scientists, it shows up as the desire to discover truth and expand human knowledge. In entrepreneurs, it expresses itself as the urge to build something valuable and lasting. In athletes, it drives the pursuit of physical excellence and competitive achievement. The will to power is what makes you feel most alive and authentic. When you are exercising this drive in healthy ways, you experience what I called the feeling of power, a sense of growing strength, expanding capability, and increasing mastery over your own existence. This is the feeling you get when you overcome a challenge that previously seemed impossible, when you create something that exceeds your own expectations, or when you push through your comfort zone and discover new capabilities. But here is what modern society does not want you to understand. This drive is being systematically suppressed and redirected in ways that make you weak and dependent. From childhood, you were taught to be modest about your achievements, to avoid standing out, to prioritize fitting in over expressing your unique talents. You were trained to seek approval from authorities rather than developing your own judgment, to follow prescribed paths rather than creating your own direction. This suppression of the will to power creates what I observed as widespread psychological sickness. When people cannot express their natural drive for growth and mastery in healthy ways, it turns inward and becomes self-destructive. They become depressed, anxious, resentful, and addicted to various forms of escapism. They lose their sense of purpose and vitality because they have been cut off from their most fundamental life force. The difference between healthy and pathological expressions of will to power is crucial to understand. Healthy will to power is directed primarily toward self-mastery and self-creation. It seeks to overcome internal obstacles, to develop personal capabilities, and to create value in the world. Pathological will to power by contrast, is directed toward controlling others, avoiding personal responsibility, and accumulating external symbols of status without developing real competence. Many people who appear powerful in conventional terms are actually expressing pathological will to power. They seek positions of authority not because they want to create something valuable, but because they want to avoid the hard work of genuine self-development. They prefer to control others rather than master themselves because external control feels easier than internal discipline. To channel your will to power in healthy directions, you must first give yourself permission to want great things. Stop apologizing for your ambitions and stop feeling guilty about your desire to excel. These desires are not selfish or harmful. They are the expression of your deepest life force, seeking a CTUALIZATION. Next, focus this drive primarily on self-mastery rather than external achievement. Ask yourself, what skills do I need to develop? What weaknesses do I need to overcome? What aspects of my character need strengthening? Use your will to power to become the person you are capable of becoming, and let external success flow naturally from this internal development. Finally, remember that the will to power is meant to be expressed in action, not just contemplation. This drive requires resistance to push against, challenges to overcome, and obstacles to master. If your life is too comfortable and easy, your will to power will atrophy. Seek out appropriate challenges that force you to grow and embrace the struggle as the natural expression of your most fundamental drive. Perhaps no concept of mine has been more misunderstood and misappropriated than the Bermensch, the Overman or Superman. This idea has been twisted by political propagandists and distorted by those who wanted to use it for their own destructive purposes. But the Bermensch has nothing to do with racial superiority or political domination. It is a symbol of human potential, like the butterfly's metamorphosis. This artifact of radical transformation from one form of existence to a completely higher form. The Bermensch represents the next stage of human evolution, not biological evolution, but psychological and spiritual evolution. It is the individual who has successfully moved beyond conventional morality to become a creator of their own values. Where most people spend their lives following inherited beliefs and borrowed purposes, the Bermensch creates meaning from their own experience and judgment. Think of it this way. Throughout history, humanity has been like a caterpillar, crawling along the ground, limited by inherited instincts and social programming. The Bermensch is like the butterflies, the same creature transformed into something that can fly, that can see the world from a completely different perspective, that has access to possibilities the caterpillar could never imagine. This transformation is available to any individual who has the courage to undertake the process of self-overcoming. It is not about becoming better than other people in some competitive sense. It is about becoming better than your current self. About actualizing potentials that most people never even recognize they possess. The Bermensch has moved beyond the need for external validation or approval. They do not define themselves by what others think of them, or by how well they conform to social expectations. Instead, they have developed such a strong sense of their own values and purposes that they can stand alone, if necessary, creating meaning and direction from their own authentic judgment. This requires what I call self-overcoming, the ongoing process of identifying and transcending your current limitations. Every time you overcome a fear that has been holding you back, every time you develop a capability you did not previously possess, every time you choose growth over comfort, you are moving in the direction of the Bermensch. But most people will never attempt this journey because it requires them to give up the security of following prescribed paths. It is much easier to let others define what success means, what values are important, and what purposes are worth pursuing. The Bermensch, by contrast, takes full responsibility for creating their own definition of a meaningful life. Throughout history, there have been individuals who approached this ideal, great artists, who created entirely new forms of beauty, philosophers who developed revolutionary ways of understanding existence, leaders who inspired others to transcend their limitations, scientists who expanded the boundaries of human knowledge. These people were not perfect, but they shared the common characteristic of being self-directed creators rather than followers of inherited scripts. The path to becoming an Bermensch requires several key developments. First, you must develop the intellectual courage to question everything you have been taught to believe without examination. This includes religious beliefs, moral assumptions, cultural values, and social expectations. You must be willing to stand alone with your own judgment, even when it conflicts with popular opinion. Second, you must cultivate the emotional strength to bear the weight of complete responsibility for your own existence. When you stop blaming others for your problems and stop waiting for external authorities to tell you what to do, you must be prepared to handle the anxiety and uncertainty that comes with ultimate freedom. Third, you must develop the creative capacity to generate new values and purposes that serve your authentic development. This is not about being selfish or ignoring the welfare of others. It is about discovering what unique contribution you are capable of making to the world and then organizing your life around actualizing that potential. The Bermensch is not a destination you reach once and then maintain forever. It is an ongoing process of becoming, a continuous journey of self-creation and self-overcoming. Every day presents new opportunities to choose growth over stagnation, authenticity over conformity, courage over comfort. Most importantly, the Bermensch does not seek to impose their values on others or to create followers and disciples. They understand that each individual must undertake their own journey of self-creation. They inspire others not through preaching or commanding, but through the example of what becomes possible when someone fully commits to actualizing their authentic potential. I want you to imagine the most profound thought experiment ever conceived, one that has the power to transform how you evaluate every choice you make and every moment you live. Picture an infinite circle, this artifact of eternal cycles, where the serpent of existence consumes its own tail in an endless loop of repetition. This is the concept of eternal recurrence, and it represents the ultimate test of whether you are living an authentic life. The thought experiment goes like this. What if you had to live your exact life, with all its joys and sorrows, successes and failures, pleasures and pains, over and over again for eternity? Every moment exactly as it was, every choice exactly as you made it, every experience exactly as you lived, it repeated infinitely, without change or escape. Would you choose such a fate? Would you be able to say yes to your life if it had to be lived again and again forever? When this idea first came to me, I felt both terror and exhilaration. Terror because I realized how few people would be able to embrace such a destiny, how many would be horrified at the thought of repeating their lives exactly as they had lived them. Exhilaration because I understood the tremendous power this concept had to force radical honesty about the quality and authenticity of one's existence. Most people, if confronted with this possibility, would immediately begin to feel regret, resentment, and despair. They would think about all the time they had wasted, all the opportunities they had missed, all the ways they had compromised their authentic desires to please others or avoid discomfort. The thought of repeating their mediocrity, their cowardice, their self-betrayal for eternity would be unbearable. But this is precisely why eternal recurrence is such a powerful tool for authentic living. It forces you to take complete responsibility for your existence. It eliminates all the excuses and justifications you use to avoid fully engaging with your life. It asks the ultimate question: are you living in such a way that you could affirm every moment, even the difficult and painful ones, as necessary parts of a existence you would choose again and again. The concept also transforms how you understand suffering and difficulty. If you knew that every painful experience would repeat eternally, you would be motivated to find ways to extract meaning and growth from that pain rather than simply enduring it passively. You would ask yourself, how can I transform this suffering into something valuable? How can I use this challenge to become stronger and more capable? Eternal recurrence is not just a philosophical thought. Experiment it is a practical guide for decision making. Before making any significant choice, ask yourself, if I had to repeat this decision and its consequences forever, would I still make the same choice? This question will quickly separate the authentic choices from the ones driven by fear, conformity, or temporary desires. I discovered that only individuals with tremendous strength and self-affirmation could truly embrace eternal recurrence. These are people who have lived so authentically, who have created so much meaning and value in their existence, that they would gladly repeat every moment. They understand that even their mistakes and failures were necessary parts of their development, that even their suffering served a purpose in making them who they became. The person who can say yes to eternal recurrence has achieved what I called amawafati love of fate. They have reached a state where they are grateful for their entire existence, including the parts that were difficult or painful. They understand that their struggles were not obstacles to their happiness, but essential elements of their strength and character. This concept also reveals the profound difference between those who create their own meaning and those who wait for meaning to be provided by others. If you have spent your life following other people's expectations, pursuing goals that were not authentically yours, and avoiding the risks necessary for genuine self-actualization, the thought of eternal recurrence will fill you with horror. But if you have courageously pursued your own path, created your own values, and taken responsibility for becoming who you truly are, eternal recurrence becomes not a curse but a blessing. The ultimate question eternal recurrence poses is this: are you living as the author of your own existence, or are you living as a character in someone else's story? Are you creating a life that expresses your authentic nature and highest potential? Or are you simply going through the motions of existence without ever fully engaging with your own possibilities? Use this concept as a daily practice. When you face difficult decisions, when you are tempted to take the easy path or compromise your authentic desires, ask yourself, is this how I would choose to live if I had to repeat this moment forever? Let eternal recurrence be your guide back to authentic, courageous, fully engaged living. One of my most revolutionary insights concerns the nature of knowledge itself, and it has the power to liberate you from every form of dogmatic thinking that has ever limited your potential. Imagine a kaleidoscope, this artifact of shifting perspectives, where the same colored fragments create completely different patterns depending on how you turn the viewing lens. This is how reality actually works. There are no absolute facts independent of the perspective from which they are viewed, only interpretations filtered through the lens of human consciousness. When I declared that there are no facts, only interpretations, I was not promoting some kind of wishy-washy relativism, where all opinions are equally valid. I was revealing something much more profound and liberating. All human knowledge is perspectival, shaped by the needs, interests, and limitations of the knower. Understanding this frees you from the tyranny of believing that there is only one correct way to see any situation. Think about how this works in your own experience. When you encounter any event in your life, you automatically interpret it through the lens of your personal history, your current goals, your emotional state, and your cultural background. The same situation can be seen as a devastating setback or a valuable learning opportunity, as evidence of your inadequacy or proof of your resilience, depending entirely on the perspective you choose to adopt. Most people do not realize they are constantly choosing their interpretations. They think their perspective is simply the truth, and that anyone who sees things differently is either ignorant or dishonest. This creates tremendous psychological rigidity and prevents them from adapting their viewpoint when it would serve their growth and happiness. But once you understand perspectivism, you gain incredible power over your own experience. You realize that you can consciously choose the interpretive lens through which you view your life. If a particular perspective is making you weak, bitter, or hopeless, you can examine whether there might be other ways of understanding the same situation that would serve your development better. This does not mean that all perspectives are equally useful or life-enhancing. Some interpretations promote human flourishing, creativity, and growth, while others promote stagnation, resentment, and decline. The key is to evaluate perspectives based on their consequences for your own development and the development of others, rather than on some abstract notion of absolute truth. I discovered that the most powerful individuals throughout history have been masterful at choosing life-enhancing perspectives. When faced with setbacks, they interpreted them as learning experiences. When confronted with criticism, they used it as information for improvement rather than evidence of their worthlessness. When encountering obstacles, they saw them as challenges to overcome rather than reasons to give up. The weak, by contrast, consistently choose interpretations that confirm their helplessness and justify their failure to take responsibility for their own lives. They interpret challenges as evidence that life is unfair, criticism as proof that others are against them, and setbacks as confirmation that they are not capable of success. Perspectivism also reveals why traditional philosophy and religion have been so limiting. They try to establish absolute truths that everyone must accept, regardless of whether those truths serve their individual development. They create rigid doctrines that prevent people from adapting their understanding to their changing circumstances and growing capabilities. The free spirit, by contrast, maintains what I called intellectual flexibility. They are willing to change their perspective when they encounter new information or when their current viewpoint stops serving their growth. They understand that consistency is less important than effectiveness, that being right according to some abstract standard is less valuable than choosing interpretations that promote life and creativity. This applies powerfully to how you understand yourself. Most people accept limiting interpretations of their own nature and potential based on past experiences, other people's opinions, or cultural stereotypes. They think these interpretations are facts about who they really are, not realizing that they are choosing to see themselves through unnecessarily restrictive lenses. But once you grasp perspectivism, you can begin to experiment with different ways of understanding your own capabilities and potential. Instead of saying, "I am not good at this," you can say, "I have not yet developed this skill." Instead of "I always fail at relationships," you can say, "I am learning how to create healthy connections with others." Instead of "I am not creative," you can say, "I am discovering new ways to express my unique perspective." The practice of perspectivism requires both courage and discernment. Courage because it means giving up the false security of believing you have access to absolute truth. Discernment because you must learn to distinguish between life-enhancing and life-diminishing interpretations, between perspectives that promote growth and those that justify stagnation. Use this understanding to become more conscious of the interpretive lenses you habitually use. Notice when you are viewing situations in ways that make you feel powerless, resentful, or hopeless. Ask yourself, is there another way to understand this situation that would serve my development better? Practice shifting perspectives until you find ones that promote your strength, creativity, and authentic self-expression. To understand how to free yourself from limiting moral systems, you must first understand how those systems developed in the first place. Imagine an archaeological dig, this artifact of historical excavation, where we carefully brush away layers of moral sediment to reveal the original foundations beneath. What I discovered when I traced our moral concepts back to their origins was shocking. Most of what we consider eternal moral truth is actually the result of historical accidents and power struggles. My method of genealogy involves asking a simple but revolutionary question about any moral concept. How did this idea develop? Who benefited from promoting it? What psychological needs did it serve? When you apply this method to concepts like good, evil, guilt, and sin, you discover that they have very specific historical origins that have nothing to do with timeless truth. Let me trace the genealogy of the word good to show you how this works. Originally, in aristocratic societies, good meant noble, powerful, beautiful, excellent, everything associated with the ruling classes who had the power to define values. The aristocrats looked at themselves and their way of life and declared it good simply because it was their way of life. Bad, by contrast, meant common, plebeian, everything associated with the lower classes. This was master morality in its pure form. The strong creating values based on their own experience of what promoted life and excellence. There was nothing mysterious or supernatural about these values. They simply reflected the preferences and lifestyle of those who had the power to make their preferences into social norms. But then something remarkable happened. The priestly classes, those who lacked physical power but possessed intellectual cunning, engineered a complete reversal of these values. They convinced people that the original good was actually evil, and that what had been considered bad was actually good. Poverty became blessed, suffering became noble, humility became virtuous, and strength became sinful. This reversal was not accidental. It served the specific interests of those who promoted it. The priests gained power by making the weak feel morally superior to the strong, by convincing the unsuccessful that their failure was actually virtue, and by creating guilt in the naturally powerful to make them more controllable. Christianity perfected this reversal and spread it throughout Western civilization. It taught people to see their natural instincts as sinful, to feel guilty about their desires for success and excellence, and to believe that their weakness and suffering made them morally superior to those who achieved greatness. The concept of sin itself is a perfect example of manufactured guilt. Human beings naturally experience desires, ambitions, competitive feelings, and sexual impulses. But Christianity labeled these normal human experiences as sinful, creating a psychological condition where people became their own worst enemies, constantly monitoring and criticizing their own natural responses to life. This had a devastating effect on human psychology. People internalized this critical voice and developed what I called bad conscience, the phenomenon of turning their aggressive instincts inward against themselves instead of directing them outward toward creative achievement. Instead of using their energy to overcome external obstacles and create something valuable, they began using it to attack and undermine their own natural impulses. The genealogy of guilt reveals how this emotion was systematically cultivated to make people controllable. Originally, guilt was simply the feeling of being in debt to someone. You felt guilty when you owed something and had not yet repaid it. But the priestly classes expanded this concept until people felt permanently indebted to God, to society, to their ancestors, creating a psychological condition of chronic indebtedness that could never be fully resolved. This manufactured guilt served multiple functions for those in power. It made people docile and obedient, afraid to assert themselves or challenge authority. It channeled human energy away from worldly achievement and toward internal self-criticism. It created a market for absolution. People would do almost anything to escape the psychological torment of constant guilt. But here is what you must understand. These moral concepts are not discoveries of eternal truth. They are human inventions, created to serve specific psychological and political purposes. Once you understand their genealogy, you can begin to evaluate them based on whether they serve your own development and authentic self-expression. The historical accident that made slave morality dominant in Western civilization does not mean it represents the final word on human values. You can trace your own moral assumptions back to their origins and ask, does this belief system promote my growth and creativity, or does it keep me weak and dependent? Does it encourage me to develop my capabilities, or does it make me feel guilty about my natural desires for excellence? Understanding genealogy also reveals why so many people today feel psychologically conflicted and spiritually empty. They are trying to live by moral systems that were designed to serve the interests of ancient priests and rulers, not to promote the flourishing of modern individuals. They have inherited values that make them ashamed of their strength, guilty about their success, and confused about their authentic purposes. The path forward requires what I called a revaluation of all values, a systematic examination of every moral assumption you have inherited to determine which ones serve your authentic development and which ones hold you back. This is not about becoming amoral or ignoring the welfare of others. It is about creating a value system based on your own experience of what promotes life, growth, and human excellence, rather than blindly following inherited prescriptions. This genealogical understanding also explains why moral reformers throughout history have always faced such fierce resistance. They were not just challenging ideas, they were threatening the power structures that depended on those ideas for their legitimacy. When you begin to create your own values based on your authentic experience, you are participating in this same tradition of moral innovation and human liberation. Throughout my philosophical journey, I encountered individuals who represented what I considered the highest form of human development, the free spirit. Picture a birdcage with its door flung wide open, this artifact of mental liberation, where the inhabitant has suddenly realized that the barriers that seemed so solid and permanent were actually just constructions that could be transcended. The free spirit is someone who has broken through the mental chains of conventional thinking and learned to navigate life using their own authentic judgment. The free spirit is not someone who simply rebels against authority or rejects all social conventions out of spite. That would be mere reactive behavior. Another form of mental slavery where your choices are still determined by what you are against rather than what you are for. The true free spirit has moved beyond both blind conformity and blind rebellion to a state of intellectual independence, where they can evaluate ideas based on their own experience and reasoning. What makes someone a free spirit is their willingness to question everything they have been taught, not out of cynicism or nihilism, but out of a genuine desire to discover what is actually true and valuable. They understand that most of what passes for knowledge in society is actually just inherited prejudice, unexamined assumptions, and comfortable lies that people tell themselves to avoid the difficulty of thinking independently. The journey to becoming a free spirit begins with what I called intellectual courage, the willingness to examine your most cherished beliefs with the same critical scrutiny you would apply to ideas you disagree with. This requires tremendous psychological strength, because it means being willing to discover that some of your fundamental assumptions about life, morality, and meaning might be completely wrong. Most people lack this courage because they are terrified of uncertainty. They prefer to live with comfortable illusions rather than face the anxiety that comes with not knowing. But the free spirit has developed the inner strength to tolerate uncertainty, to live with questions that have no easy answers, and to continue thinking even when thinking leads to uncomfortable conclusions. The process of becoming a free spirit involves what I called unlearning, systematically identifying and releasing the false beliefs, limiting assumptions, and inherited prejudices that have been programmed into your mind since childhood. This is often more difficult than learning new things, because these old beliefs feel like part of your identity, and questioning them can feel like questioning who you are. But this process of intellectual liberation brings tremendous rewards. The free spirit experiences a lightness and joy that is unknown to those who remain trapped in conventional thinking. They no longer need to defend beliefs they never chose or maintain positions that contradict their direct experience. They can change their mind when they encounter new evidence, and they can admit ignorance without feeling diminished. The free spirit also develops what I called intellectual honesty, the ability to see things as they actually are, rather than as they wish them to be or as they have been taught they should be. This includes being honest about their own motivations, limitations, and self-deceptions. They would rather know an uncomfortable truth than believe a comforting lie. This intellectual independence comes with a price: loneliness. The free spirit often finds themselves isolated from those who remain trapped in conventional thinking. They cannot participate in the comfortable certainties that bond most social groups together. They must be prepared to stand alone with their own judgment, even when it conflicts with the unanimous opinion of everyone around them. But this loneliness is not the bitter isolation of the outcast. It is the solitude of the mountain climber, who has reached heights that others are not willing to attempt. The free spirit finds compensation for their social isolation in the joy of authentic thinking, in the pleasure of discovering new perspectives, and in the satisfaction of living according to their own carefully examined values. The free spirit becomes a creator of new possibilities rather than just a consumer of inherited ideas. They ask questions that others are afraid to ask, explore territories that others consider forbidden, and develop insights that can benefit all of humanity. They become what I called philosophers of the future, individuals who think beyond the limitations of their time and culture to cultivate the free spirit within yourself. Begin by noticing when you hold opinions simply because they are socially acceptable rather than because you have examined them carefully. Practice saying, "I don't know," when you truly don't know, rather than repeating what others have told you. Question your automatic reactions and inherited preferences. Most importantly, develop the courage to think thoughts that others might find disturbing or unacceptable. Remember that intellectual freedom, like all forms of freedom, requires ongoing effort to maintain. The forces of conformity and conventional thinking are always trying to pull you back into comfortable assumptions and unexamined beliefs. The free spirit must continuously choose independence over security, truth over comfort, and authentic thinking over borrowed opinions. Among all the philosophical attitudes I developed, none has brought me greater peace and strength than amor fati, the love of fate. Imagine embracing arms open wide to welcome both storm and sunshine, this artifact of complete acceptance that receives whatever life brings with equal gratitude and affirmation. This is not passive resignation or bitter endurance, but active love for the totality of your existence, including its most difficult and painful aspects. Amor fati means saying yes to your life exactly as it has unfolded, without wishing that anything had been different. It means being grateful not just for the pleasant experiences, but for the setbacks, the failures, the suffering, and the challenges that have shaped you into who you are. It means recognizing that every aspect of your experience has been necessary for your development, even the parts that felt unbearable at the time. Most people live in a state of constant resistance to their circumstances. They spend enormous amounts of energy wishing their past had been different, resenting their current situation, or anxiously trying to control their future. This resistance creates tremendous psychological suffering because it puts them in conflict with reality itself. They are essentially declaring war on existence and then wondering why they feel exhausted and defeated. But amor fati represents a completely different approach to life, one of radical acceptance and active gratitude. Instead of fighting against what has happened or what is happening, you learn to embrace it as part of your unique path of development. You begin to see that even your worst experiences have contributed something valuable to your growth and understanding. This does not mean becoming passive or failing to work toward positive change in your life. Amor fati is not about giving up your goals or accepting harmful situations that you can actually improve. It is about accepting what has already happened and what is currently beyond your control, while still taking full responsibility for what you can influence going forward. The practice of amor fati transforms your relationship with suffering in profound ways. Instead of seeing pain as something that happens to you, something that makes you a victim of circumstances, you begin to see it as raw material for creating strength, wisdom, and character. You ask not, why is this happening to me, but how can I use this experience to become who I am meant to become? I discovered this principle through my own intense suffering, my health problems, my social isolation, my philosophical struggles. All of these difficulties that once seemed like obstacles to my happiness became the very experiences that forged my character and deepened my understanding. Without my suffering, I would never have developed the insights that became my greatest contributions to human thought. When you truly embrace amor fati, you develop what I called gratitude without conditions. You become thankful not just when things go your way, but especially when they challenge you to grow beyond your current limitations. You recognize that comfort and ease, while pleasant, do not typically produce the kind of character development that comes from facing and overcoming difficulties. This attitude of unconditional acceptance also frees you from the exhausting cycle of regret and resentment that traps so many people. You stop wasting energy on thoughts like, if only this had happened differently, or I should have made a different choice. Instead, you channel all your energy into making the best possible use of your current circumstances. Amor fati requires a fundamental shift in how you understand the relationship between happiness and life circumstances. Most people believe that happiness comes from having the right external conditions, the right job, the right relationship, the right amount of money, the right health situation. But amor fati reveals that true happiness comes from your attitude toward whatever conditions you actually face. The person who has achieved amor fati possesses an unshakable inner peace because their well-being is no longer dependent on external circumstances. They have learned to find meaning and value in any situation, to extract growth from any challenge, and to maintain their essential joy regardless of what life brings them. This does not make them indifferent or emotionally numb. They still feel the full range of human emotions, still prefer pleasure to pain, still work toward their goals with passion and commitment, but their fundamental relationship with existence is one of gratitude and affirmation rather than resistance and complaint. To cultivate amor fati in your own life, begin by examining the experiences you most resist accepting. What aspects of your past do you still wish had been different? What current circumstances do you spend energy resenting? Practice asking yourself, how has this experience contributed to making me who I am? What strengths or insights have I gained that I would not have developed otherwise? Remember that amor fati is not something you achieve once and then maintain effortlessly. It is a daily practice of choosing acceptance over resistance, gratitude over resentment, and affirmation over complaint. Each time you catch yourself fighting against reality, you have an opportunity to practice loving your fate instead. The concept of eternal recurrence becomes truly powerful when you apply it as a practical guide for daily decision-making. Think of it as a spiral staircase. this artifact of ascending repetition, where you return to the same point but at a higher level each time, using the principle of infinite repetition to elevate the quality of your choices and eliminate everything that does not serve your authentic development. Every decision you make, every word you speak, every moment you live, imagine that you will have to repeat it exactly as it occurred, infinite times throughout eternity. This thought experiment has the power to separate the authentic from the inauthentic in your life with surgical precision. Suddenly, every choice carries the weight of infinite consequence, and you cannot hide behind the excuse that it doesn't really matter or no one will ever know. When you apply eternal recurrence to your daily life, you quickly discover which of your activities truly serve your growth and which are merely distractions or escapes from authentic living. That hour you spent scrolling through social media, that conversation where you gossiped about someone else, that moment when you chose comfort over challenge would you choose these same actions if you knew you would have to repeat them forever? The principle works like a filter that removes everything mediocre, inauthentic, and life-diminishing from your existence. It forces you to ask, is this how I want to spend my precious time and energy if I have to live this moment infinitely? This question eliminates procrastination, self-pity, and all the small ways you betray your own potential on a daily basis. But eternal recurrence is not just about elimination. It is also about identification and amplification of what is most valuable in your life. When you discover activities, relationships, and pursuits that you would gladly repeat forever, you know you have found elements of authentic living that deserve more of your attention and energy. Think about the moments in your life when you felt most alive, most authentic, most connected to your deepest values and highest potential. These are the experiences that would pass the eternal recurrence test with flying colors. The key is to organize your life so that more of your time is spent in activities that create these peak experiences and less time is wasted on things that diminish your vitality. The principle also transforms how you approach difficult situations and challenges. Instead of trying to avoid or minimize discomfort, you ask, if I have to repeat this challenging situation eternally, how can I meet it in a way that I would be proud to repeat? How can I use this difficulty to demonstrate the kind of person I want to be? This shift in perspective eliminates victim consciousness and self-pity. You cannot indulge in feeling sorry for yourself when you realize that your attitude toward your challenges is something you will have to live with forever. Instead, you are motivated to find ways to meet difficulties with courage, creativity, and grace. Eternal recurrence also eliminates regret and second-guessing. Once you make a decision using this principle, you can commit to it fully without constantly wondering if you should have chosen differently. You know that you chose based on the highest standard possible, whether you would be willing to repeat this choice infinitely. The practice requires you to slow down and become more conscious of your automatic behaviors and reactions. Many people live their lives on autopilot, making choices based on habit, impulse, or social pressure without really considering whether these choices reflect their authentic values and aspirations. But when every moment carries the weight of eternity, you cannot afford to live unconsciously. This heightened consciousness leads to what I called selective living, the art of choosing only those experiences, relationships, and activities that truly serve your development and eliminating everything else. You become incredibly selective about how you spend your time, with whom you associate, and what you allow into your mental and emotional space. The result is a life of extraordinary intensity and authenticity. Every moment becomes precious when you know it will repeat forever. Every choice becomes significant when you understand its eternal consequences. Every relationship becomes sacred when you realize you will experience it infinitely. Use eternal recurrence as a daily practice. Before making any significant decision, pause and ask, Would I choose this if I had to repeat it forever? Before engaging in any activity, consider, is this worthy of infinite repetition? Before speaking, ask, are these words I would be proud to speak for eternity? This practice will gradually eliminate everything inauthentic from your life and help you create an existence so fulfilling, so aligned with your deepest values, that you would choose to live it again and again without hesitation. This is the ultimate goal of eternal recurrence, not just to test your life, but to inspire you to create a life that passes the test magnificently. My critique of Christianity has been perhaps the most controversial aspect of my philosophy, but it is essential to understand what I was actually attacking. I was not opposing genuine spirituality or the human search for meaning. I was challenging a specific set of values that I believed were systematically weakening humanity and preventing individuals from reaching their full potential. Picture an inverted cross, this artifact of reversed values, representing how life-denying religious morality had turned natural human instincts upside down. When I wrote The Antichrist, I was not positioning myself as an enemy of all religious feeling or spiritual seeking. I was targeting what I saw as a particular form of organized religion that had made weakness into a virtue, suffering into a blessing, and self-denial into the highest form of moral achievement. This inversion of natural values was, in my view, making people sick both psychologically and spiritually. Christianity, as it developed through history, created what I called a slave revolt in morality. It took all the natural aristocratic values, strength, beauty, pride, excellence, self-assertion, and labeled them as sins or temptations. Meanwhile, it elevated weakness, poverty, humility, and suffering to the status of virtues. This had the effect of making naturally strong people feel guilty about their strength and naturally successful people ashamed of their achievements. The psychological damage this caused was enormous. Instead of encouraging people to develop their capabilities and express their authentic nature, Christianity taught them to suppress their vital instincts and feel guilty about their natural desires for growth, achievement, and self-expression. It created what I called bad conscience, the phenomenon of people becoming their own worst enemies, constantly criticizing and undermining their own efforts to thrive. But my opposition to Christianity was not just about its psychological effects, it was about its fundamental attitude toward life itself. Christianity taught people to see earthly existence as a temporary trial to be endured, rather than a precious opportunity to be celebrated. It promised that real life would begin after death, which had the effect of devaluing the only life we can be certain we have. This life-denying attitude infected every aspect of human experience. Natural human emotions, like anger, desire, ambition, and pride, were labeled as spiritual problems, to be overcome, rather than as energies to be understood and channeled constructively. The body was seen as a source of temptation, rather than as a magnificent instrument for engaging with the world. Success and achievement were viewed with suspicion rather than celebrated as expressions of human potential. The concept of sin was particularly destructive because it taught people to view their natural human responses as evidence of their fundamental corruption. Sexual desire, competitive feelings, the urge to excel, the pleasure taken in one's own accomplishments, all of these normal and healthy human experiences were framed as spiritual failures that required constant vigilance and suppression. This created a society of people who were at war with their own nature, who spent enormous amounts of energy fighting against their own instincts instead of learning to channel those instincts in constructive directions. It produced what I called the sick animal, human beings who had become alienated from their own vitality and natural strength. But rejecting life-denying values does not mean embracing selfishness or cruelty. The alternative to Christian morality is not immorality, is a life-affirming value system that promotes human flourishing creativity, and authentic self-expression, while still maintaining genuine care for others. It means distinguishing between healthy self-assertion and pathological domination, between natural pride and destructive arrogance. A life-affirming morality celebrates strength while showing compassion for weakness, encourages excellence while maintaining kindness toward those who struggle, and promotes individual achievement while recognizing our interdependence with others. It sees human nature as something to be developed and expressed, rather than suppressed and denied. The key insight is that genuine compassion comes from strength, not weakness. A person who has developed their own capabilities and achieved their own authentic success is much better positioned to help others than someone who has been taught to feel guilty about their natural desires for growth and achievement. You cannot give what you do not have, and you cannot inspire others to reach their potential if you have not developed your own. This is why I advocated for what I called noble selfishness, the kind of self-development that ultimately serves not just the individual, but all of humanity. When you become the strongest, most creative, most authentic version of yourself, you inspire others to do the same. When you refuse to apologize for your excellence, you give others permission to pursue their own excellence without guilt or shame. The path forward requires what I call the revaluation of all values, a systematic examination of every moral assumption you have inherited to determine which ones promote life and growth and which ones diminish human potential. This is not about abandoning all moral considerations, but about creating a moral framework based on what actually serves human flourishing rather than on inherited doctrines that may have outlived their usefulness. Begin by examining your own relationship with success, achievement, and self-assertion. Do you feel guilty when you excel? Do you apologize for your accomplishments? Do you suppress your natural competitive instincts or your desire to stand out? These may be signs that you have internalized life-denying values that are preventing you from reaching your full potential. When I set out to write my deepest philosophical insights, I realized that traditional academic prose was inadequate for the task. The ideas I wanted to communicate could not be captured in logical arguments or systematic treatises. They required a different form of expression entirely. So I created Zarathustra, a character who descended from his mountain peak, this artifact of elevated wisdom, to share transformative insights through stories, parables, and poetic visions that could work on multiple levels of human consciousness. I chose the format of poetic storytelling because I understood something that most philosophers miss: the deepest truths about human existence cannot be communicated through rational analysis alone. They must be felt, experienced, and lived before they can be truly understood. The parables and metaphors in Thus Spoke Zarathustra are designed to bypass the rational mind's tendency to categorize and dismiss new ideas, speaking directly to the deeper layers of consciousness where real transformation occurs. The central story of Zarathustra's descent from the mountain represents every individual's journey from comfortable isolation to the difficult work of sharing wisdom with a world that may not be ready to receive it. Zarathustra had spent 10 years in solitude, developing his understanding and growing in wisdom. But eventually, he realized that this wisdom was meaningless unless it could be shared and applied to improve human life. That this reflects my own experience. As a philosopher, I could have remained safely isolated in my academic position, writing scholarly papers that only other professors would read. But I felt compelled to bring my insights to a broader audience, even though I knew this would make me controversial and possibly misunderstood. The wisdom that transforms lives cannot remain hidden on mountaintops. It must descend into the valleys where people actually live. One of the most important parables in Zarathustra is the story of the 3 metamorphoses, how the human spirit transforms from camel to lion to child. The camel represents the person who accepts heavy burdens, who says yes to whatever authorities place upon them, who carries the weight of inherited beliefs and social expectations without question. Most people remain camels their entire lives, never questioning the loads they carry. But some individuals become lions. They develop the strength to say no to false authorities, to reject inherited values that do not serve their authentic development, to break free from the mental chains that have bound them. The lion is necessary for liberation, but it is not the final stage of development. The lion can destroy old values, but cannot create new ones. The final transformation is becoming a child, covering the innocence, creativity, and spontaneous joy that allows for genuine value creation. The child does not destroy out of resentment, like the lion, nor does it accept burdens like the camel. Instead, it plays, creates, and discovers new possibilities with natural enthusiasm and wonder. This progression represents the complete journey of authentic human development, from unconscious conformity through conscious rebellion to creative authenticity. Most people get stuck in either the camel or lion stages, never reaching the childlike creativity that allows them to become genuine creators of their own values and meaning. Another crucial teaching in Zarathustra is the parable of the soothsayer, who preaches the doctrine of meaninglessness and eternal sameness. This represents the nihilistic despair that many people fall into when they lose their inherited beliefs but have not yet discovered their power to create new meaning. The soothsayer tells people that everything is empty, that nothing matters, that all efforts are futile. But Zarathustra rejects this nihilistic conclusion. He acknowledges that there may be no inherent meaning in existence, but he insists that this makes human meaning creation more important, not less. If the universe does not provide ready-made purposes, then humans have the extraordinary opportunity and responsibility to create purposes that serve life and promote flourishing. The format of poetic parable also allowed me to communicate the concept of eternal recurrence in ways that could be felt as well as understood intellectually. When Zarathustra first encounters this idea, he is initially horrified by it, but gradually he learns to embrace it as the ultimate affirmation of life. This emotional journey mirrors what any individual must go through to truly integrate this challenging concept. The teaching stories in Zarathustra work on multiple levels simultaneously. On the surface, they are entertaining narratives about a fictional character's adventures and insights. On a deeper level, they are psychological maps for human development and transformation. On the deepest level, they are invitations for readers to undertake their own journey of self-overcoming and authentic self-creation. The reason I chose this artistic approach is that philosophical transformation cannot be imposed from the outside, must arise from within through the reader's own recognition and choice. The stories provide frameworks and possibilities, but each individual must apply these insights to their own unique circumstances and challenges. This is why Zarathustra consistently refuses to create disciples or followers. He understands that authentic wisdom cannot be transmitted as a set of rules or beliefs to be accepted. Instead, it must be discovered through each person's own experience of questioning, experimenting, and creating. The goal is not to make people think like Zarathustra, but to inspire them to think for themselves with the same courage and creativity. Philosophy, I realized, had become far too serious, heavy, and life-denying. Academic philosophers sat in their studies, creating elaborate systems of thought that seemed designed more to impress colleagues than to enhance human existence. They approached the deepest questions of life with such ponderous gravity that they drained all joy and vitality from the pursuit of wisdom. I envisioned a different kind of philosophy, one that would be like a laughing mask, this artifact of joyous wisdom, bringing lightness and playfulness to the most profound investigations of human existence. I called this approach the gay science, meaning the joyful pursuit of knowledge. This was not frivolous or superficial thinking, but rather the recognition that true wisdom should make you more alive, more creative, more capable of joy, not more burdened with pessimistic conclusions about the nature of existence. The best philosophical insights should feel like discoveries that liberate rather than truths that oppress. Think about what happens when you learn something that genuinely transforms your understanding. There is usually a moment of joy, a sense of liberation, a feeling that new possibilities have opened up. This is the emotional signature of authentic wisdom. Expands, rather than contracts, your sense of what is possible in life. Philosophy that consistently makes people feel hopeless, powerless, or meaningless is not serving its proper function. The gay science requires what I called intellectual courage, but it is courage combined with curiosity and playfulness, rather than grim determination. It approaches difficult questions with the spirit of adventure, rather than the spirit of duty. It asks, what if, and why not, rather than immediately focusing on all the reasons why new ideas cannot be true or useful. This playful approach to serious questions is actually more rigorous than conventional academic philosophy because it is not constrained by the need to defend predetermined positions or maintain consistency with established authorities. The gay scientist is free to follow ideas wherever they lead, to experiment with different perspectives, and to change their mind when they encounter compelling new evidence or arguments. I discovered that laughter and lightness are essential tools for philosophical investigation. When you can laugh at your own certainties, you become more open to questioning them. When you can approach sacred beliefs with humor, you create space for genuine examination rather than defensive rationalization. Laughter dissolves the psychological rigidity that prevents most people from thinking freely. But the gay science is not just about intellectual investigation. It is about approaching life itself with a spirit of experimentation and play. Instead of treating your existence as a problem to be solved or a burden to be endured, you learn to see it as a creative project to be explored. You become the artist of your own life, experimenting with different ways of being, different values, different approaches to relationships and work and meaning. This requires what I call dancing with ideas, the ability to hold concepts lightly, to play with possibilities, to entertain thoughts without immediately committing to them as final truths. Most people are afraid to think certain thoughts because they worry that thinking them might make them true or might obligate them to act on them. But the gay scientist understands the difference between exploring an idea and endorsing it. The joy of wisdom comes from recognizing that you do not need to have final answers to life's big questions in order to live a meaningful and fulfilling existence. In fact, the questions themselves can be sources of energy, creativity, and wonder. The person who has figured everything out has actually stopped growing, while the person who remains curious and questioning continues to discover new dimensions of experience. This approach transforms how you deal with uncertainty and ambiguity. Instead of seeing these as problems to be eliminated, you learn to see them as sources of possibility and freedom. Uncertainty means that outcomes are not predetermined, that you have real choices, that your actions can make a difference. Ambiguity means that life is rich enough to support multiple interpretations and approaches. The gay science also reveals the importance of aesthetics in philosophy. The most profound truths are often also the most beautiful ones, and the most life-enhancing. Philosophies tend to have an elegance and grace that purely logical systems lack. When you approach philosophical questions with an artist's sensibility as well as a thinker's rigor, you often discover insights that purely analytical approaches miss. Music, dance, poetry, and visual beauty are not distractions from serious thinking. They are alternative forms of intelligence that can reveal aspects of reality that discursive reasoning cannot capture. The gay scientist learns to think with their whole being, not just their analytical mind. And this holistic approach often leads to more complete and satisfying understanding. The practical application of the gay science means bringing this spirit of joyful experimentation to your daily life. Instead of getting stuck in routines and habits that no longer serve you, you maintain a playful willingness to try new approaches. Instead of defending your current beliefs and preferences as if your identity depended on them, you remain open to growth and change. Most importantly, you learn to find joy in the process of questioning, discovering, and creating, rather than only in the achievement of final answers or external success. This makes you more resilient in the face of setbacks and more creative in the face of challenges, because your satisfaction comes from the quality of your engagement with life rather than from specific outcomes. All of my philosophical insights mean nothing unless they can be applied to improve how you actually live your daily life. The modern mirror, this artifact of contemporary reflection, shows how timeless wisdom must be adapted to current challenges and opportunities. Let me show you how to translate these abstract concepts into practical strategies for navigating career, relationships, and personal development in today's world. The first practical application involves creating your own value system in our pluralistic age. Unlike previous generations who lived in relatively homogeneous communities with shared beliefs, you face the challenge of constructing meaning in a world where multiple value systems compete for your allegiance. This is both an opportunity and a responsibility that requires you to think deeply about what you actually believe promotes human flourishing. Start by conducting what I called a personal genealogy of your current values. For each major belief you hold about success, relationships, morality, and meaning, ask yourself, where did this belief come from? Did I choose it based on my own experience, or did I inherit it from family, culture, or media? Does this belief actually serve my authentic development, or does it limit my potential? This process often reveals that many of your supposedly personal values are actually borrowed from sources that may not have your best interests at heart. Consumer culture wants you to define success through material accumulation. Social media encourages you to seek validation through others' approval. Traditional institutions may promote conformity over individual excellence. Your task is to separate the values that truly serve your growth from those that keep you dependent and mediocre. In your career, apply the principle of will to power by focusing primarily on developing genuine competence and mastery rather than pursuing external symbols of success. Ask yourself, what work would I find meaningful even if no one else approved or rewarded it? What skills do I want to develop for the sheer joy of mastery? How can I create value that serves others while expressing my authentic capabilities? This approach often leads to unconventional career paths because it prioritizes internal satisfaction and genuine contribution over conventional markers of achievement. You might discover that your authentic calling requires you to create your own role rather than fitting into existing categories, or that your greatest fulfillment comes from mastering skills that others consider impractical or unmarketable. The eternal recurrence principle transforms how you approach daily decisions. Before accepting any commitment, whether it is a job, a relationship, or even a social engagement, ask yourself, would I choose this if I had to repeat it infinitely? This question quickly separates authentic choices from those driven by fear, obligation, or social pressure. Apply this same test to your habits and routines. That hour you spend watching television, that tendency to complain about circumstances beyond your control, that pattern of seeking others' approval before making decisions, would these behaviors pass the eternal recurrence test? Use this principle to eliminate everything that diminishes your vitality and amplify everything that makes you feel most alive and authentic in relationships, Move beyond both master and slave morality dynamics. Instead of trying to dominate others or allowing yourself to be dominated, seek what I called noble friendship relationships, based on mutual respect for each other's growth and authentic self-expression. Surround yourself with people who inspire you to become better rather than those who enable your weaknesses or demand that you remain small to make them comfortable. Practice perspectivism in your personal relationships by recognizing that conflicts often arise from different viewpoints rather than from fundamental incompatibilities. Instead of assuming that your perspective is the only valid one, ask, how might this situation look from their point of view? What needs or concerns might be driving their behavior that I am not seeing? Develop psychological strength through what I called voluntary hardship, deliberately choosing challenges that force you to grow beyond your current limitations. In our comfort-obsessed culture, you must consciously seek appropriate difficulties that develop your character and capabilities. This might mean taking on projects that stretch your skills, having difficult conversations you have been avoiding, or pursuing goals that require you to overcome significant obstacles. The free spirit practices intellectual independence by regularly questioning popular opinions and mainstream narratives. Develop the habit of asking, who benefits from promoting this idea? What assumptions am I being asked to accept without examination? What alternative perspectives am I not being shown? This does not make you cynical or contrarian, it makes you thoughtful and autonomous. Create regular practices that connect you with your authentic self beneath the layers of social conditioning. This might involve journaling about your genuine desires and concerns, spending time in solitude to hear your own thoughts clearly, or engaging in activities that make you feel most like yourself. The goal is to maintain contact with your authentic nature despite the constant pressure to conform to others' expectations. Remember that living these principles requires ongoing effort and commitment. The forces of conformity, mediocrity, and life denial are always present in society, trying to pull you back toward conventional limitations. You must choose authenticity, growth, and self-creation repeatedly, making it a daily practice rather than a one-time decision. As we reach the end of our journey together, I want to leave you with my most important challenge: become who you are. This phrase represents the essence of everything I have tried to teach. Not who others expect you to be, not who you think you should be, but who you actually are when you strip away all the layers of false conditioning and borrowed beliefs. Picture a forged signature being created, this artifact of unique authenticity, representing the one-of-a-kind self that emerges when you fully commit to the process of philosophical self-creation. Becoming who you are is not a destination you reach, but a process you embrace. It requires the ongoing courage to examine your life, question your assumptions, and choose growth over comfort. It means taking full responsibility for creating meaning in what might be a meaningless universe, and finding joy in that responsibility, rather than being crushed by it. The process begins with radical honesty about your current condition. You must be willing to see clearly where you are now. What fears are holding you back? What inherited beliefs are limiting your potential? What habits and patterns are keeping you trapped in mediocrity? This honest self-assessment can be painful because it reveals the gap between who you are and who you are capable of becoming. But this pain is the birth pang of authentic transformation. Next, you must develop the courage to disappoint others. In service of your authentic development, many people remain trapped in inauthentic lives because they cannot bear the thought of not meeting others' expectations. But becoming who you are requires you to prioritize your own growth over others' approval, your own judgment over popular opinion, your own path over conventional success. This does not make you selfish or antisocial. When you become authentically yourself, you have much more to offer others because you are operating from strength rather than weakness, from fullness rather than emptiness. The person who has developed their authentic potential becomes a source of inspiration and possibility for everyone around them. The journey of self-creation requires you to embrace what I called creative destruction, the willingness to let go of aspects of your current identity that no longer serve your growth. This might mean changing careers that drain your vitality, ending relationships that diminish your potential, or abandoning beliefs that limit your possibilities. Each act of letting go creates space for something more authentic to emerge. But you must also become a creator, not just a destroyer. Becoming who you are means actively building the life, relationships, and contributions that express your unique combination of talents, interests, and values. You cannot just rebel against what you do not want to, must create what you do want. Even if no one has created it before, this creative process requires tremendous faith in your own judgment and capabilities. You must trust that your authentic desires and interests, when pursued with discipline and commitment, will lead to something valuable both for yourself and for others. You must believe that your unique perspective and contribution matter, even when the world seems to reward only conventional achievements. The responsibility of creating meaning in a potentially meaningless universe is both terrifying and exhilarating. Terrifying because it means there are no external authorities to blame when things go wrong, no predetermined purpose to follow when you feel lost. Exhilarating because it means you have the power to create significance through your choices, to generate purpose through your commitments, to build meaning through your actions. Your philosophical legacy is not something you leave behind when you die, it is something you create through how you live. Every choice to act authentically rather than conventionally, every decision to pursue growth rather than comfort, every moment when you choose courage over fear contributes to the ongoing human experiment in conscious self-creation. The world needs individuals who are willing to undertake this journey, because authentic people inspire others to discover their own authenticity. When you refuse to settle for mediocrity in your own life, you give others permission to pursue excellence in theirs. When you create your own values based on what actually promotes human flourishing, you contribute to the evolution of human consciousness. But remember that becoming who you are is not a project you complete and then maintain effortlessly. It requires constant vigilance against the forces of conformity, constant courage to continue growing when growth becomes uncomfortable, constant commitment to authenticity when authenticity demands sacrifice. The journey has no final destination, because human potential is infinite. Each level of development reveals new possibilities for growth. Each achievement opens up new challenges to master. Each authentic choice creates space for even greater authenticity. This is why the process itself must be a source of joy and satisfaction, not just the outcomes it produces. My final challenge to you is this: stop waiting for permission to become who you are. Stop waiting for the right circumstances, the right opportunities, the right support from others. Start now, where you are, with what you have. Begin the process of questioning, creating, and choosing that will gradually reveal your authentic nature and unique contribution to the world. The philosophical journey I have shared with you is not just an intellectual exercise, it is an invitation to live with greater authenticity, courage, and joy. Take these ideas and make them your own through experience, experimentation, and application. Let them serve as tools for your own self-creation rather than as dogmas to be followed blindly. Go forth and create yourself. The world is waiting to see what you will become when you fully embrace the responsibility and opportunity of authentic existence. Your philosophical journey has only just begun, and the greatest discoveries lie ahead of you.